anxietycenter.com.
Okay, my question is, are the anxiety symptoms that, like, I have this flowering of anxiety symptoms that I've had, several of them actually for many, many years, but they just kind of blossomed into becoming unmanaged, something that really stopped me in my tracks a few months ago. And I'm wondering if it's those symptoms that you are talking about when you say, well, all of this can be managed and stopped so that you no longer have these symptoms. And do I have to, let's see, what does it take to just get to the point where the symptoms are gone? I mean, how much of it is exploration of the things that I'm thinking about or have thought about, and how much of it is just a matter of learning to manage my body, what I'm doing with my body?
Right, that's a good question, because it's actually both. For example, we want to take it back to the basics that anxiety symptoms are actually symptoms of stress. If we're seeing our symptoms increase, it means our stress is increasing. They're directly tied together. And of course, anxiety causes stress, so that's usually the connection. The chain of events is we're anxious, that anxiousness stresses the body, that stress produces symptoms, and then usually anxiety personalities are worriers, and so as they worry about their symptoms, of course that further stresses the body and that produces more symptoms, and we sort of get that cycle going. But in order to recover, we have to do two things. One is we do have to address the body's level of stress. So that's the first approach, is to get the stress down so that your body can reduce its symptom load and we can start to feel better. And we do that through deep relaxation and a lot of the techniques we mentioned at the website. But then the most important part of keeping our stress down is addressing the underlying factors that cause us to be more fearful in the first place. So the overall goal is to get the body's stress down so the symptoms subside. So that's part one. And part two is going after the behaviors that cause us to be more anxious and stressed, so that once our body is calm, we don't get it stressed back up again. This is one of the problems of medication. Since medication doesn't fix anything other than manage symptoms, if a person can feel better because their symptoms are down or their stress has come down, they come off the medication and very quickly their body gets stressed back up again because their behaviors haven't changed. So it becomes a never-ending cycle of medication off, medication off, medication off, because the underlying factors have never been touched, so the behaviors don't change. So that's sort of part one. Now, we mentioned at the Anxiety Center about underlying factors, and there's a lot of them, and each person will have a different set of the ones that are the most predominant. And that's why working with a counselor is good, to find out what those underlying factors are so that we can be aware of them and then make behavioral change. Just to give you an example, a lot of anxiety personalities are worriers. And we're worriers because we grew up in an environment that lended itself for us to worry more so than other people. And then worry becomes a way we learn to protect ourselves in the world. And so we've learned to think negatively about things because we've learned how to protect ourselves by doing that. Our rationale is, if I can only imagine the worst case scenario, then I can avoid it. And so we go about our day imagining worst case scenarios to try to avoid them. But the problem is that whenever we imagine them, the body incurs stress. So simply by us worrying about future events that may occur, if we become afraid of them, the body experiences an immediate stress response right there and then. So we're actually paying stress for an event that may never occur. That's true.
I know that's true. I try to figure out what could happen and avoid it, and tell my children and everybody how to avoid how to avoid the possible disastrous outcome. But that's because there were disastrous outcomes. For me, and there was no way that I could avoid them.
Right, and that's usually what happens. It's usually a combination of, we quite frequently see people with anxiety struggle because they've had parents who are overprotective. And what I mean by that is when you grow up, as you're heading out the door, your parents give you a long list of things to be careful of.
My parents were the opposite. They were totally unprotected.
Okay.
And my dad created a situation that was impossible. Mm-hmm. So I just learned, I guess, I don't know.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because again, that can also occur that way. Remember, fears are learned, right? And as a child, if we don't have someone giving us a balance of good protection yet letting us explore, then the only thing we have left to protect ourselves with is worry. Because we're kids, we don't have a lot of resources. And so the only way we learn that, okay, I need to keep myself safe, so the best way is to prevent that from occurring. So in order to prevent that from occurring, I have to imagine all the things that can go bad so I can prevent myself from incurring those. So
that makes sense.
So, for example, those who are underprotected, yes, usually run into very difficult circumstances that seem beyond our control. And so rather than, and again, because we're too young and we don't have good coping skills, the first resource again is to worry. And that becomes the way we manage our life. We learn to keep ourselves safe by worrying, yet that worry produces stress. Because again, we have to remember, we always want to keep in mind that the brain's going to respond to fear whether it's real or perceived. I'll give you an example. If a person has an annoying pain in the body and they're health sensitive, they may worry that that pain is cancer, and of course the minute they think of cancer, their fear responses go off because they're not sure what it is, and it could be, and oh my gosh, it's going to happen, what's going to look after my kid, and we start to run down that worry trail, and all the while we're doing that, the body's producing stress hormones.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
guess what? The more worrisome we are, the more stressed our body becomes, and the more stressed the body becomes, the more symptomatic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that makes good sense. Thank you. Yeah.
So,
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
So again, it's a very
Oh,
common.
by the way, I just want to tell you before you hang up with me, I have 2 of your CDs. One of them is the progressive relaxation. The other one is just the scene, a scenery, a day, through a day, a beautiful day. And I listen to them all the time. And I'm just hooked on the sound of your voice now.
Well, thank you so much.
And I was driving home from the airport in the dark, and I can't see, and it was very stressful. And I put that CD on, and I was calm. I drove home calm. So I am conditioning myself somehow, I guess. I'm starting to anyway.
Good for you. Because here, you raised a really good point. And thank you for the comments. I appreciate that. In fact, it's kind of funny because when we have support groups, a lot of people say they have the CDs and they say, Jim, I have such a hard time staying awake through these conversations because I'm so used to your voice being calm. So they have a hard time making that change.
You program people to your voice. When they listen to it.
That is too funny. But what I was saying is, you raise a good point, and that point is what we're going to be talking a lot about at the website is containing. When we come from backgrounds where we weren't given those healthy parenting skills and tools to grow through adversity, we don't learn how to contain well. And contain means keeping our fears in check. Because think about it. Panic really is nothing more than a high degree fear response. It's not this unusual animal that shows up. It just means that we're really afraid. And we usually spend a lot of time in that really afraid area only because we haven't learned how to contain our fears in a lower range. Because we're saying really dramatic things to ourselves rather than calming and soothing things. You raised a good point. Driving home hard to see, and it would be easier for us to say, oh my gosh, this is awful, I could crash, this is terrible. Well, we could do that. Guess what? We'd have a stress response. Rather than what you did is you said, okay, calm down. I'll get through this. I'm going to be fine here. You are keeping your fears at the lower range, preventing them from going up. And that's
but I didn't say it to myself. I put on your tape, and somehow or other, I was calm.
Right. But you see, you use an external source to keep you calm, where when children come from a healthy background, that's the skill we learn, is to keep ourselves healthy by the things we say. You see what I'm saying? We learn how to contain and say calming things. We develop a vocabulary of calm internal self-talk that keeps us calm. And
maybe we should learn that from a parent who does that. Yeah.
Right. And for example, with a healthy background where we have parents who contain well, don't have anxiety, we learn those skills. But when our background is not that, when we have, for example, my background, I have a lot of anxious, both my parents are very anxious, so they don't contain themselves. So naturally, my first response to adversity is to overreact. So rather than me spending in the lower registers like 20 degrees of anxiety, I'm up to 80 and 90 all the time. Well, it's no wonder my body produced symptoms, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. But you know how to manage them now, or to stop them, or?
Yeah, because what I did learn, when you really think about it, I learned how to contain my fears at a lower level. So rather than me being overreactive to things, I learned how to underreact and keep myself calm simply through what I was saying to myself.
That
makes sense?
But if I have a habit if my experience taught me that this is out of control and there's nothing I can do about it,
Mm-hmm.
and there really wasn't anything I could do about it. Now, what could I say to myself to counteract that?
Right. Well, we have a tool that we use in the coaching and counseling sessions. It really comes down to looking at the evidence. And while all of us have experienced, very unsettling experiences where we felt out of control, not all of our life is like that. But what we do is we generalize. We perceive those kind of experiences in a lot of the risks as they come toward us, when in fact very few of them have the out-of-control nature. And the other saving grace is this: as we get older, we have a lot more resources at our disposal to protect us from those seemingly out-of-control events. We've learned to think that they can be out of control, and that's become our internal belief system, when in fact we have to challenge it and say, no, wait a minute now, is it really out of control?
Mm-hmm.
What control do I have here? For example, we teach also in counseling good boundaries, how to take only responsibility for what is ours rather than being over responsible for everybody else. And we also teach people how to not put on fear or try it on to see how it fits, because we do that too. Again, unhealthy behaviors we learned when we were growing up. So essentially what we do is we learn how to contain in different ways. Can you give me an example of an event today that you think might be out of control?
Let's see. Well, I wake up in the morning with fear,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll have all kinds of fearful thoughts, my son. His immune system isn't very good, and so I'm afraid that he's going to get sick and have to deal with sickness his whole life. And I can get really into. But there's a million different things that I could think like that, and that I do think.
Yeah. And you see, that is where we struggle, is because we do imagine very, very dangerous situations in a lot of situations. We take our worry and we apply it to almost everything. Because when you think about it, we can worry unending about everything if we wanted to.
Yes, I can. I know that I can.
Yeah. There's nothing preventing us from doing that except us. So we're the ones that have to say, now, wait a minute now, what is the evidence in this? Is it really that out of control? And is this really going to occur? Because a couple of saving graces here, too, is that 99% of the things we worry about don't come true. And even if they were to come true, they're usually not as bad as we thought they were going to be. And I'm not saying we don't have to face adversity. I'm just saying that most of our worries are needless worry and nothing more. So we want to find a way to keep our worry in check, so that we're spending time doing things about the things we can do things about, and yet not over-worrying about things that are out of our control. Right?
How do you do that, though? The world seems so scary to me. It's like, look, it's going to hell in a handbag right now as we speak.
Yep, yeah.
Really?
Now, and here's the other thing, too, is, again, we take on too much ownership of all the things around us. Here's some of the detriment of our media. We're now being taught, and all the events around the world are coming home to roost on our doorstep, where they never used to. We used to just have news about the local events, so we weren't dealing with, the conquests of the other countries and all the death and dying and plane crashes and all that. So
Right.
Because of media now, we're getting bombarded by all of this world event. Now, remember here, we have 6 billion people on Earth, over 6 billion people. Surely there's going to be car crashes. Surely there's going to be bad things that happen. But if we start to own them and perceive our world to be that way, then you can see how we can become distressed. So it takes good management.
Absolutely. And aren't we supposed to be empathetic? And it seems like I empathize with everybody, and I don't know how to not.
Yep. You're raising all good questions, and these are all the things we address in counseling, because they are factors. For example, a lot of people have assigned their empathetic nature to love, yet their empathetic nature causes them sickness. So we have to learn a healthy boundary in terms of what do I need to own and what don't I, and how much do I need to emotionally invest in things that aren't mine to invest in. That doesn't mean it's not a reflection of our love. Now, we learn how to live that way because of past experience, but it's not a healthy way for us to live. And I'm not suggesting we become cold, callous people. We can still be caring, but we also know where to set that limit of emotional investment is, so that it's appropriate to our own health, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Healthcare providers.
I was just thinking of that. Doctors and nurses. Yeah.
You bet. Sometimes they may seem cold and distant, But what they're doing really is they're putting that barrier between their emotional investment and their professional duty. Just imagine if a doctor was to emotionally invest in every case that came along, he or she would only be doctoring for a short period of time because they would be stressed to the max. But a good healthcare provider learns how to separate themselves from another person's burden. And you have to be able to do that. So that you can continue to be a good healthcare provider. And again, I'm not suggesting being cold and callous. We can still be caring and understanding and empathetic and supportive for that matter, but we don't have to try on the other person's condition to see how it feels or wear it as the other person wears it.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, you're right. But, yeah, I do that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just think about it. I mean, we're only given the ability to carry our own burdens, and that's enough for us.
Jesus said, carry your neighbor's burden, but then he also said, or was that Paul? They must carry their own too.
That's right, exactly right. You bet. And God is a great example of that. When Christ was here, as you know, he didn't heal everybody. A lot of times he had to leave to get rest, so he knew where his limit was, right? Like think of all the times he had to leave and steal away, and there were still a lot of people looking for healing that he didn't heal because he had to go rest. He knew his limit, and that's what a good caregiver does. Is they know their limit. They can give and give and give, but when their limit is reached, they have to take care of their own health. And the only way you can do that is by putting a boundary in place, right?
That seems to be true. I seem to be up against that.
Yeah. Now, just based on our conversation, just imagine if you're emotionally investing in all of the news stories that show up, all of your friends and family members, their relatives, co-workers, and all those things. Who can manage that burden and stay healthy?
Well, I don't know that anybody can, and
right.
It's proven that I can't.
Yeah, we weren't designed to do that. Now, I certainly admire your empathy and care and concern for others, but you can still have that and yet not wear their hurt or pain. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how to do that, but
yeah.
I see what you're saying.
I'll just give you an example. A family member recently has come down with a difficult condition, and it was distressing to us to hear about it because it's a person we care deeply about. But if we were to emotionally invest in his condition, then the whole family would be drawn down into terms of stress and discomfort and illness and all of that. And that's not healthy either, because then we can't provide support to him or her when they're going through that challenge. So what we can do is we can empathize, we can be there to support, but we can't wear their burden. We have to let them wear that burden. And that's not a sign of lack of love. It's a sign of love so that we can continue to give from our resources. Again, you see how, as an anxiety personality, some of the things you mentioned are classic for why we struggle with anxiety. We're usually empathetic, we're caring, we're analytical, we want to help people, but what we do is we overburden our own body's ability to keep up. Essentially, we write emotional and physical checks the body can't cash. And then it becomes sick. Yep, that's what happens. So, all right, so how do we change that is we look at things from a real world perspective. In fact, I have to laugh. I love my dad dearly, and he loves me, and he's such a worrier. And one day we were talking on the phone, and he was so worried, and he says, Dad, you don't have to worry about me. And he says to me, but I worry because I love you. So he has equated worry with love. He can still love me without worrying about me. In fact, his worry does very little to protect me when you really think about it.
Right.
I'm managing
except I guess, I can relate to him because I worry about my kids, and they don't want me to, but if I don't, it seems like they don't do enough worrying.
Yep.
They don't take the precautions that seem obvious that I want them, that would be good for them.
Sure.
And so it seems like I'm helping, but maybe I'm not.
Well, let's talk about that too, because you raise a really interesting situation. We want to raise our children so that they're independent and self-reliant. Not distant, but independent, self-reliant, so they can look after themselves and so they can be responsible for themselves. As a parent, if we overprotect them by trying to point out all of the dangers, we make them anxious.
Yeah.
And if we try to prevent them from being hurt, we rob them of important opportunities to learn good coping skills. So a parent has to find the balance of being supportive being loving and protective during those early ages. But as the children get older, we have to allow them to explore the world in their way, and to let them scuff their knee and bump their head and all those kind of things, so that they can learn, well, the world is out there. It's not a great place, but I can still be okay in it. But if we don't get that environment, then we become anxious and we become fearful and very, very tentative to move out. So again, we don't raise healthy children. We actually raise disabled children.
Well, I was raised fairly disabled by the opposite of saying, okay, sink or swim, that's it.
Yep.
So I think I'm overcompensating, but
we do, yeah, we do, yeah. And so we do swing from one side to the other, but the healthy balance is in the middle, where we don't want to overprotect them, but also we don't want to leave them vulnerable either. But there is a certain age as they get into the upper teens, where we have to let go and let them explore the world. In fact, their driving desire at that age group is independence. And if we're trying to be overprotective, they're just going to see that we're nagging.
Right.
Yeah, so that's not healthy either. So you got to find that balance. And sometimes it's a hard place to find. But also, as a parent, you have to not emotionally invest in their lives. You have to let them live their lives. And I'm not saying you don't care about them and support them. I'm just saying we don't have to wear their challenges. Because if we wear their challenges, there's a high likelihood that we're going to absolve them of their consequences, which means we further disable them.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's the notion of boundaries. And boundaries is such a wonderful subject to study, especially as our interactions with adults and interactions with children, because we can really do our children harm by thinking we're doing the best for them. By learning good boundaries, we can model what good boundaries are. We teach them to have a good coping skills, so they're not anxious. They'll keep their stress down. And sure, they may, run into some difficulty, but as they work themselves out of the difficulty is where they really grow into independent people. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's true. Well, okay. You gave me a thought that I hadn't had before. Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm not a people pleaser, but I'm definitely someone who takes other people's burdens, and that is something I'm going to think about.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
Very hard. And
boundaries will help you there too, because it talks about, we call that over responsibility, is when we're over responsible for other people's things. And that's another underlying factor that we work with our clients through, is to teach them not to be over responsible. Now, when we come from families who are doing that, it just seems like a natural to do that, but it is unhealthy for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see this. But part of the problem, though, is that I do see the world as, I see the entire world as being horrible, actually. I mean, it's awful. Look at nature. Animals live by killing other animals. I think survival of the fittest is brutal. The world is brutal. Yeah. And I don't like it. And I feel it as, and human nature is pretty much, the human ego ends up in causing all kinds of inhumanity to man, and it's grim. I see the whole world as pretty much in a grim light, right, myself.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, maybe I'm not seeing accurately, or maybe there's some way that I should see it, but doesn't it seem kind of grim to you, too?
Okay. Well, and when you talk like that, that's a reflection of your belief system. And remember, when you read through the website, that we develop our belief systems by the way we internalize information and the conclusions we draw based on our life experience. Yeah. And what you said to me is a reflection of your system of beliefs. You have internalized a number of notions that cause your view of the world to be dim. And again, what we do as counselors and coaches is we go through that system of beliefs and help you to identify the unhealthy belief set, to make modified changes to it so that it's balanced rather than just being dark all the time. Because, all right, there are some really horrible things that happen on earth. And as you know, God gave us free will, and He doesn't intervene when we make bad choices. And our choices do affect others on occasion. So all of that can occur. And we have all these other things going on, but on the same token, there are still some wonderful things going on Earth that we can focus on. It's like another way of looking at this is the attitude we choose. It's the glass half full or half empty, depending on how we choose to look at it. And as you recognize from the website too, we know that our thought processes is going to determine our life experience. In other words, what we think about our life is going to determine what our life experience is like. And when we come from difficult backgrounds, because of our thinking patterns have some unhealthy attributes to it, we think in terms of darkness and despair and dangerous. And so a counselor can help identify those and say, now, is this really true? Give you a different way of looking at that belief, to challenge it, to say, I never really thought of it that way. Well, I guess there is some good here. And as our system of belief begins to change, so does our attitude and outlook. So when you ask me, isn't the world dark? There's dark aspects to it, yes, no question about it. But there's still some wonderful aspects to it as well. I mean, you look at, I'm old enough to have grandchildren, and I'm thrilled with the grandchildren. When you look at them playing and sing and how they interact with the grandparents, it's a wonderful joy. So there's great joy and beauty there too.
I have one grandchild too, and he's beautiful.
Absolutely. So not all the world is bad. And if our view is that all the world is bad, you see how we've sort of gone a little bit to the wrong side of the belief system. We want to say, wait a minute, now, is it really all bad? Yeah, there are some aspects of it, absolutely, but there's still some wonderful aspects too. I mean, when we look at the terrorism and the wars going on, yeah, that's brutal and grim, and unfortunately we get bombarded every day by it. In fact, I'm not sure where you live, but here in Canada, every time a soldier dies in Afghanistan, the news parades it and they take it to the funeral every single day. Now, I love the people who are out there trying to bring freedom to those who are oppressed. I love that, and I think they're great, brave soldiers, and my heart aches too when one of them dies, and for their parents and family and all those things. I do that. But do we have to take the nation to every funeral? No, we don't have to do that. So again, we're being bombarded by media who has a real habit of really portraying the dramatic and the hurt, so we want to curtail a little bit of that. Because look in some of the churches, for example, in just our church alone, we see tremendous healing and joy and people helping people and all these things going on that are really wonderful. So again, it depends on where we spend our time looking, right? But but just from our conversation, you see how we have learned to live in a certain way that lends ourselves to be more stressed because our thinking is more anxious.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that is all learned. We learn how to do that. The good news is we can also learn how to do it in a healthier way.